Get ready.
Hello, I am Liam Ashcroft and welcome to another episode of This is Saturn. In today's episode we're strapping ourselves in for another game courtesy of the arcade racer genre, the aptly titled Gale Racer. Before we talk about Gale Racer, we've got to discuss another game, Rad Mobile. Released to the arcades in April 1991, Rad Mobile was a product of the masterful AM2 division of SEGA and the absolutely legendary Yu Suzuki. The game sees you travel across America from Los Angeles to New York in a race to the finish. During the game you drive a prototype Ferrari and you have to dodge other cars, traffic and the police in order to claim first place, with the game being split into 6 areas, each with 3 or 4 stages in each. The game used sprite scaling incredibly well for stuff like the road and other vehicles, and it had some neato effects like the bank turns. Further immersive gameplay was created through the fact the game had a fixed first-person driving perspective. Even more so, in some stages you'd need to activate windscreen wipers or headlights so you had decent visibility of the track. This wasn't an automatic thing, you had to activate these yourself with buttons on the cabinet, which added to the immersion. You even had a little air freshener swaying in your car, and what do you know, it's Sonic! I know that I said this game came out in April 1991. That makes this Sonic's first ever appearance in a game, even before Sonic 1 on the Mega Drive. Not bad. For some reason, unlike games such as Outrun and Afterburner 2, Rad Mobile was never ported to the Mega Drive. I'd assume the sprite scaling had something to do with that, but I'm also surprised Power Drift never got a Mega Drive release, yet it got a Commodore 64 release. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here. SEGA did eventually decide to port Rad Mobile, and how convenient for us that they chose the Saturn as the platform for this port. Something slightly less convenient? Rad Mobile's new Saturn port, rechristened Gale Racer, was released a mere week or so after the Saturn's launch in Japan, and it was never released in the West. Which seriously blows. I have no idea why they didn't release it here. Perhaps they thought it was outdated by the time the Saturn got a Western release. Anywho, the only way of playing this one is a Saturn with an Action Replay 4M Auto, or even going the full Monty and grabbing a Japanese Saturn like me. One thing added for the Saturn port is a story, so let's quickly run over that. Apparently, there was once a racer known as the Gale Racer, and he was pretty bloody good. Now there's a race being held across America, and whoever wins it will from that point on be known as, well, the Gale Racer. Feel rep for the old Gale Racer then, unless he's participating in this for his old title. Anyway, there's one small caveat about this race. Anything goes. As I'll detail later, they aren't kidding with that last bit. So, Gale Racer, how well did SEGA manage to port Rad Mobile? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let's get this done. At its core, Gale Racer and Rad Mobile are the same game. Same track design, same concept, race across America, get in first place, same basic gameplay. You're still restricted to a first person view, and you still need to use stuff like windscreen wipers and headlights in certain stages. So at a glance, everything checks out fine. When you begin to analyse the transition to Saturn a bit though, things become somewhat more patchy, so let's run over the differences. Well, for one incredibly minor difference to start with, your car is now blue. What an amazing difference. In Rad Mobile the car was actually blue in the cutscenes, but it was black in normal gameplay. This makes pretty much no difference to the game though, and I prefer the appearance of Gale Racer's car purely on the fact that the vibrant colours just spring out brighter. In general, the colour palette in Gale Racer is very nice. I felt Rad Mobile's was perhaps a tad too muted, especially for a bright blue sky SEGA game, so the added vibrancy is great to see. Secondly, all of the vehicles are no longer scaled sprites like in Rad Mobile, but now they are polygon models. This modernisation does make some sense. I mean, obviously the Saturn's the big new 32-bit 3D console, but it can lead to some nasty graphical glitches, such as the cars frequently clipping through the road graphics, especially on the bank turns. I don't mind these little glitches too much, but I do think I slightly prefer Rad Mobile's scaled sprites. One huge difference is the draw distance. Gale Racer really isn't too impressive graphically, it's effectively just sprite scaling, but hot damn is the draw distance laughable here. Compared to the original, Gale Racer is abysmal in this department. It's possibly even worse than Sonic R, especially considering this is a port of a superscaler game. The fact there's any draw distance issues is pretty saddening to see. It's especially noticeable in the Cheyenne stage, where it's also pouring it down. You can barely see anything. One cool new feature that I do really like is the larger focus on rival cars. In the original game you had rivals, you had to beat them, simple as. However, in Gale Racer, most stages have a specific type of rival, such as the dual Porsches in Columbus and the frequently spinning out car in Chicago that deliberately tries to ram into you. Above all in my mind is the bloody truck in the Rocky Mountains stage that tries to force you off the edge of the cliff. It's a nice addition and it really adds some dynamic gameplay. One criticism I do have is that the excitement of escaping the coppers in the rest of the game in Rad Mobile has been stripped out, as not only do the coppers only appear in one stage in this port, they can't even arrest you. A real shame. One final change of note is the loading times. Now in between each stage there's loading screens displaying your time for that stage and etc, whereas in the original there was a seamless transition between stages. The loading times are barely more than a second or two, so it's nothing too bad, but it's still not exactly great either. That's honestly most of the main differences covered without delving too deep into the quality of each game. So how does Gale Racer stand on its own? Well, when you boot the game up, you're introduced to the main menu and there's quite a few options on it. First off is Speed Race, which is the main arcade mode if you will. Race to the finish and place first. Worth noting is that there's two different endings. To get the good ending, you have to defeat the final souped up car, which I assume is supposed to be like the grand return of the original Gale Racer of Legend or something, by smashing into him and sending him careening down the road on his roof. It's actually pretty cool to be honest. This mode takes roughly 15 minutes to complete and is good old fashioned arcade style racing. Just as a quick note, the ending as well as the game's intro sequences are rendered in FMV. Whilst this isn't anything special by today's standards, for the time I reckon these FMVs look pretty damn good. The good ending in particular is pretty awesome and the car battle it depicts is ace, if a bit more exciting than how it goes down in the actual game. Another quick thing to note is in this version of the game, you scored on how your driving was using mascot points. The better you do, the more points you get, and as you reach point intervals, that little Sonic Earth freshener on the dashboard returning from Rad Mobile actually changes. You can get the likes of Tails and Eggman swinging from the roof of your car instead, and for those who love Sonic games, this game actually gets pretty obscure with Earth fresheners of one-shot characters like Ray the Flying Squirrel from SEGA Sonic Arcade, Silver Sonic aka Mecha Sonic MK1 from Sonic 2, and Mecha Sonic MK2 from Sonic 3, and Knuckles even shows up. As a Sonic fan, this is some incredibly cool fan service, and unlocking all these collectibles gives me incentive to replay the game. The game also has a large element of progression to it, particularly in the time attacking department. Beating your records on stages can become quite addictive, and thankfully arcade mode records all your times, so you can hone your skills. Whilst there is this element of time attacking to arcade mode, there's also a specific time attack mode. It's simple stuff, but it also works as a good way of memorising the tracks, as whilst there is still traffic to memorise, the lack of rival cars trying to smash into you with the joys of rubber banding AI means you can focus just on the tracks and the location of each part of the traffic, which I think is really beneficial. There's also a two-player mode, which is, it's pretty bland honestly. Once you get in front of your opponent, it's pretty much impossible for them to catch you, unless you manage to have a really bad crash, and at least on the stage I played with my brother for this review, there were barely any twists or turns. It was pretty much mind-numbing, but at the very least it was playable, unlike Sonic R's multiplayer. There's also an options and records menu. Record shows your best times, and options lets you change sound settings, turn the music volume right up, and you can also customise other stuff like controls. Ah yes, controls. Pretty much the entire reason I opted to do this review. Whilst researching Rad Mobile one day out of curiosity, cough because of the Sonic reference, I discovered Gale Racer, and as a result I then shifted to being curious about this Saturn port. I later picked up Retro Gamer magazine's superb video game hardware handbook, and lo and behold, in the Saturn section, Gale Racer got a nod. What threw me off slightly though was whilst Rad Mobile seemed to be reviewed positively, Gale Racer was called abysmal by this magazine. I researched further and discovered one Japanese Saturn magazine gave it a mere 24 out of 40. And then I happened upon a UK SEGA Saturn page's review of the game, which above all else criticised the controls. This was consistent with the other reviews I'd discovered. Basically, Gale Racer's controls seem universally hated for being too vague or undersensitive. Since this was so hotly contested, I decided to go for a fair test. I busted out the normal Saturn Model 2 pad, the arcade racer wheel, and the 3D pad. Yeah, as pointed out to me by my good friend and fellow SEGA Saturn fan Saturn Memories, any game that supports the arcade racer wheel also supports the 3D pad, even if they predate the production of the pad. The game simply interprets the analog stick as a steering wheel, so that's pretty nifty. So, how do the controls fare? With the D-pad, I can definitely see where the complaints come from. The steering feels pretty bloody sluggish, and this can lead to some annoying crashes and other mishaps. The steering wheel I actually think fares worse, though that's mostly due to the build of the Saturn wheel. It feels way too loose for a game as fast-paced as this. With Daytona USA, for some reason things felt a lot more comfortable, and overall I felt it improved that game quite a bit. Here the wheel can actually make the game somewhat more difficult to play, so I actually wouldn't recommend it. What with the 3D pad just being an interpretation of the wheel for this game, you'd expect it to control in a similarly lackluster way. But actually, the 3D pad is by far the best method of playing the game. The 3D pad's analog stick is already a joy to use, and it feels nowhere near as vague as the D-pad in this game, but also not as twitchy or loose as the wheel. I think it's an acceptable middle ground, and at least with the 3D pad I feel, and here's a shocker, that Gale Racer controls decently. It's not perfect, but it's sure as hell not abysmal to say the least. Now, how's about that soundtrack? The original Rad Mobile had some decent tunes, granted tunes with incredibly awkward names like Gang Bang, as in there is literally a piece of music in a SEGA game called Gang Bang. What the fuck, why? But weird names aside, the tracks were alright. All in all, though, I think I might prefer Gale Racer's soundtrack. It's nothing super incredible, and there's a serious overuse of one particular guitar sample in just about every track, but it's overall pretty decent. Just the Thing, Flushing Bead, and Midnight Illusion are particular favourites. Some do sort of veer into scratchy mess of sound territory, however, such as Mountain Storm, which only plays on the Rocky Mountain stage against the truck. I mean, I find that track okay, but it's a bit of an audio clusterfuck, all things considered. Overall, the soundtrack's passable. It actually did get a CD release in the same package as the original Rad Mobile tracks, but said soundtrack was only released in 2011. Hot damn, they took a sweet time with that one. Anyways, Gale Racer, Gale Racer, Gale Racer. This is a very interesting one for me. This game has been received by most to be mediocre, if not downright terrible. And in terms of being a port of Rad Mobile, and even on a basic technical level, it's really not that great. Stuff like the draw distance, D-pad controls, and random graphical glitches such as when you crash, they really do put a bit of a damper on the experience. So why do I love it so much? Seriously, as of late I have found myself playing Gale Racer quite a damn bit, and not just for this review either. I've already accumulated enough mascot points to reach the Silver Sonic Air Freshener. As far as I'm aware, he's like the 6th collectible you unlock. For some reason, the glaring issues with Gale Racer just don't seem to bother me too much. The draw distance is definitely what ticks me off the most, but the supposedly huge issue of the control just doesn't bug me since I always use the 3D pad, and I think the game controls pretty well with that pad. Can I recommend this game to you lot though? It's a tougher. If you can find it on the cheap, then I'd say go for it. My copy only cost a £5. I can't recommend a 3D pad enough, however, as with the D-pad or even the wheel, I can definitely see why so many people call out the controls as sluggish. I'll also say the game is definitely unpolished. Random graphical nuances such as the aforementioned car clipping and the garbled graphics during crashes, especially in the truck level, don't exactly create a great impression that this game is 100% stable. Hell, whilst recording footage at one point, the game just completely cut out on me. I checked to make sure there hadn't been a power cut, and lo and behold, my Saturn was still running. The game had just given up on me. Very peculiar. I think Gale Racer's alright myself, but that's opinions for you folks. Give it a try, maybe you'll enjoy it, maybe you won't. There's my 2 pence. Thanks for watching this episode of This Is Saturn, and happy SEGA Saturn month here on Sega Bits. Man, to think the Saturn is 20 years old this month. Time flies, eh? As for next time, I'd like to keep it a bit of a secret, but all I can say is it's time to bust out the sleigh bells because Christmas is almost upon us. See you then, folks!